We thank Shane Jones for that support.
Question number 6, Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Point of order.
Point of order, Dr Russell Norman.
This question was lodged to the Prime Minister and I seek leave of the House to have it transferred back to the Prime Minister.
Leave is sought for that course of action. Is there any objection? There is objection. Dr Russell Norman.
I won't mention... My question is to the Minister for Tertiary Education, Skills and Employment and asks, was the Prime Minister correct?
Order. That kind of interjection is unacceptable. Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Tertiary Education, Skills and Employment and asks, was the Prime Minister correct when he said on the 12th of October 2012, and I quote, that our employment rate's not rising, end quote? If so, why?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, yes, because the best advice the Prime Minister had at that time from Treasury, backed up by most private sector economists, was that the unemployment rate was likely to decrease, and that was the basis on which he made that comment. Other statistics also back up his comment, particularly the number of people on unemployment benefits, which has dropped from 55,700 to 50,400 over the year to September. That's a number of around 5,300. It is also interesting to note that despite the fact the population of New Zealand has grown between 1999 and now from 3.8 million to 4.4 million, the number of people on the unemployment benefit is around 100,000 less than in 1999, despite apparently having an unemployment rate that is the same according to the HLFS.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given that Statistics New Zealand show that unemployment has risen in every quarter since December 2011, isn't it simply a matter of fact that the Prime Minister was incorrect when he said that unemployment rate is not rising, because in fact it was rising and it has continued to rise?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, no, because although it has risen in the HLFS, it has in fact dropped in what is a measure that's very important to New Zealanders, the number of people on the unemployment benefit, which is a measure of those people who need the support of the state because they're unemployed. And the point I would make to the member is that over the last year that's dropped by around 5,300, and it's much, much lower than it was at the time of similar HLFS figures back in 1999, around 100,000.
Dr Russell Norman.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Dr Russell Norman.
I seek leave to table a paper.
Order. This is a point of order.
It's not like people going to Australia.
Order. The member shouldn't do that.
I seek leave to table a paper from the Parliamentary Library showing that unemployment has risen for 4 consecutive quarters.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no... The document is from the Parliamentary Library, a document recording unemployment figures. Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you. Supplementary, Mr Speaker. In light of the fact that this government is now overseeing the highest unemployment that we've seen this century, does he now concede that the government's economic policies have failed to produce lower unemployment in New Zealand?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, no. I would refer the member to my previous answer both to the primary and to the supplementary in relation to unemployment benefits, but also point out to the member that, again, I think he's in danger of ignoring what's been going on in the wider world in relation to 2 matters in particular: the global financial crisis, which is ongoing, and I note this week there's been further issues in Europe in terms of revision down of growth forecasts, and of course the US fiscal cliff issue is continuing, and we do actually live in the world. And also, Mr Speaker, the other challenge, which of course has been the Christchurch earthquake, and now that the rebuild is building up, we're seeing a drop of unemployment in Christchurch, but actually it has been difficult for New Zealand to grow over that period because of the challenges of its second largest city being very dramatically affected by the earthquakes.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, looking at the relative position of New Zealand in relation to the rest of the OECD, isn't it a sign of economic failure by this government when unemployment has grown at more than 1.5 times faster in New Zealand compared to the average of the OECD over the last 4 years?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, no. I mean, I'm sure the member is going to hold the graph as many ways as he can, but the reality is New Zealand has actually a lower than average unemployment rate across the OECD, which is better than many countries that we compare ourselves with. For example, the United States, and for example, the UK, and for example, countries like Denmark and Poland and France and Hungary and Italy. And it's interesting the member raises the issue in Australia. Because we have a much higher participation rate in New Zealand than in Australia, we actually have, even though we have a higher unemployment rate, we actually have a higher employment rate than Australia as well, about 2% higher in New Zealand than in Australia. Stop making it up, Mr Mallard. We actually have a higher employment rate than Australia. Read it and weep, Trevor.
Point of order, Dr Russell Norman.
I seek leave to table a paper prepared by the Parliamentary Library showing that New Zealand's unemployment has grown at 1.5 times the OECD average over the last 4 years.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Dr Russell Norman.
Supplementary. Thank you, Mr Speaker. What analysis has he done as to why his economic plan has resulted in New Zealand now having one of the fastest growing rates of unemployment in the OECD, according to the relative statistics produced by the OECD?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think the member has obviously not listened to my previous answers, and let me just recover them for him. Firstly, it's not apparent that that is necessarily the case, particularly because of the declining number of people on the unemployment benefit in New Zealand, which includes a drop of around 5,000 over the last 12 months. It has dropped over the last 12 months. You can keep saying that as often as you like, but it's dropped. And also because New Zealand has been working through, as the rest of the world has, the challenges of the global financial crisis. And in addition to that, in the case of this country, the Canterbury earthquakes. And New Zealanders actually understand those challenges.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As one of the chief authors of National's now failed economic plan, what changes is he recommending to that plan in light of the fact that we now have record unemployment figures, the highest this century, and that our unemployment is growing faster than the OECD average?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, the member will be pleased to note there will be no changes, but we will be working even harder on opportunities to remove the barriers and delays for companies seeking to invest and grow jobs. And there are a range of areas where the member could lend his moral support: oil and gas exploration, the expansion of intensive agriculture, the development of aquaculture, supporting our film industry, encouraging foreign investment, and progressing an international convention centre in Auckland. All things the Greens oppose, and all things particularly in relation to the International Convention Centre, which they have sought to stop, and which is reason right now for 1,000 less jobs in this country than there would have been at this time.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does he accept that his government's policy of backing winners of the dig it, drill it, mine it variety has now failed in light of historically high unemployment figures after 4 years of government? And isn't it time to reconsider the green economic opportunities like those identified by the group of leading New Zealand business people in the Pure Advantage Group?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, this government is only guilty of backing people that are prepared to invest their own money and not the printed money variety that the Greens advocate, which would send this country down the toilet.
Is this a point of order, Dr Russell Norman? Order.
I seek leave to table the report from Pure Advantage Group called New Zealand's Position in the Green Race from May 2012.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is objection. Question number 7, the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.